Hello everyone joining us from around the world, and we have people following us right now. Hello to all of you in countries such as Afghanistan, United States of America, Botswana, South Africa, Colombia and Egypt. Hi to all of you, and of course our friends in the Nordic countries. So, welcome to this opening session of this virtual Nordic Women Mediators meeting, which is hosted by Sweden and the Swedish Women's Mediation Network, focusing on women, peace and security during COVID-19. My name is Alexandra Pascalidou, and I'm lucky enough to be the moderator of today's session. And if you want to tweet or to Instagram or to share whatever is being said here, you can please use the hashtag Nordic Women Mediators 2020. And before we begin this session, I would like to hand over to Sven-Eric Söder, who is the Director General for the Folke Bernadotte Academy. And Sven-Eric will give us the opening remark. Välkommen, Sven-Eric.
Thank you. Tack så mycket, Alexandra. May I say good morning, good afternoon, and even good evening to all of you, depending on where in the world you are watching from. As Alexandra said, my name is Sven-Eric Söder, and I'm the Director General of the Folke Bernadotte Academy. And the Folke Bernadotte Academy is the Swedish government agency for peace, security, and development. And I'm really honored to welcome you to this virtual Nordic Women Mediators meeting called Beyond the Pandemic, a critical time for the meaningful inclusion of women in mediation and peace processes. And this event is organized jointly by the Folke Bernadotte Academy, the Swedish Ministry for Foreign Affairs, and the Swedish Women's Mediation Network. The Women, Peace and Security agenda is part of our core business at the FBA. And through the work we are carrying out, we do contribute to the realization of the Swedish feminist foreign policy. And we do that, for example, through trainings and advisory support. And our target groups and partners are civil society organizations, government institutions, but also international organizations like the European Union, the United Nations, and the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. And for the past 5 years, we have also, on behalf of the Swedish Ministry for Foreign Affairs, had the privilege to be the operational partner for the Swedish Women's Mediation Network. And this network consists of 15 eminent members, and they're all personal representatives to the foreign minister. And the Swedish network is also part of the Nordic Women's Mediation Network. Our virtual event today is timely, I would say, for many reasons. First of all, it is 25 years since the Beijing platform was adopted. But it's also 20 years since the adoption of the groundbreaking UN Resolution 1325. But above all, I would say, our work and also our virtual discussion here today are important because we still have a very, very long way to go before the Women, Peace and Security agenda is implemented in all its aspects. Because the reality is that after 25 to 20 years, we are still facing many, many challenges, and the COVID-19 pandemic has added just another layer to the already existing challenges. But I think it's also important to keep in mind that we can see opportunities in the world we are living in today. Of course, it is challenging to go online, but I think the digital solutions can also be used as a kind of a stepping stone for more inclusive discussions. And the fact that we are conducting this meeting online today means, for example, that we can reach out to a much broader audience compared to a more traditional physical meeting. But having said that, I think it's also important to understand that access to technology is not a given. Access to reliable internet and sometimes also electricity is still a challenge for many, many people around the world, and not least for many women in local communities. So the importance of bridging the digital divide between men and women cannot be overestimated. And I think it's simply unacceptable that only 54% of the world's population has access to the internet today. The COVID-19 pandemic, I think, has brought a kind of new epoch or a paradigm shift, if you like. And it is, for obvious reasons, more or less impossible to understand the long-term consequences. And the political and economic upheaval it has unleashed could last for generations. I think it's also obvious that the impact on poverty and social and economic inequality can be extremely dramatic. And on top of that, unfortunately, we have also many destructive global trends in the world of today. Our multilateral institutions and organizations, they are undermined. And this is, of course, not acceptable in a time when we need more of well-functioning multilateral cooperation. In my view, I think also politics are too much characterized by populism and stultification, if I put it that way. And that is, of course, not acceptable either in a time when we need more of political actions based on research, evidence, and proven experience. So, therefore, and maybe as a counterweight, I'm glad to see such a prominent panel here today. And we are all looking forward to listening to you, to your experiences and the actions you have identified are needed to take the important agenda of women, peace and security forward. And finally, please keep in mind that gender equality is not a policy area among others. Gender equality is a precondition for democratic, peaceful and sustainable societies. So with this said, I would like to hand over to our great moderator, Alexandra Pascalido, again. And once again, very welcome to this meeting.
Thank you so much, Sven-Eric Söder, for your words and your work. So, we will discuss the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic on women's role and influence in all phases of peacemaking. We will have a conversation about how to promote conflict resolution efforts that put women leadership at the center, and what role can the regional women's mediators networks play in supporting these efforts. This year was supposed to be a celebration of the Women, Peace and Security agenda, since it was 20 years ago that this landmark resolution, the Security Council resolution, was adopted, 1325 as it's called. But then COVID-19 pandemic evolved, and you know what happened, it overshadowed everything. But the pandemic has, on the same time, demonstrated that women, peace and security agenda is more important than ever. And the fact that it is the 20th anniversary of UNSCR 1325 provides us an opportunity to place the women, peace and security agenda at the front, at the center of the global response to the COVID-19. So, dear friends, we hope to stimulate an action-oriented discussion focused on identifying the actions and the measures that can and should be taken. The audience has been able to send us questions already before this session started, and you can do it when you're online right now. And at the end of the discussion, I promise I will forward your questions to our prominent panelists, and let's meet them. So, let me present. We start with Ambassador Roland Kobia, EU Special Envoy for Afghanistan. Welcome.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me in this program.
Thank you, Roland. Ambassador Ann Dismorr, you're here live and direct, member of the Swedish Women's Mediation Network, Director of Department for Middle East and North Africa, Swedish MFA. So nice to have you here live.
Thank you.
And Zahra Langhi, the co-founder and CEO of the Libyan Women's Platform for Peace. Zahra, welcome.
Thank you.
We're happy to have you. Thank you. Ambassador Mpeo Mahase-Moiloa, member of FemWise, lawyer by profession, advocate of the High Court and Court of Appeal of Lesotho. Hello.
Good morning, and thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, and good morning to you. Petra Tötterman Andorff from Stockholm, Sweden, the Secretary General for Kvinna till Kvinna Foundation. So nice to have you here, Petra.
Thank you very much.
And last but not least, in our neighboring country, Finland, is Astrid Thors, member of the Nordic Women's Mediators Finland. Terve.
Tack. Thank you very much. And thank you for organizing this. And Alexandra, you have wonderful earrings, feministic earrings.
Oh, thank you so much. I can give them to you after the session. Thank you so much. So, Ambassador Ann Dismorr, I would like to start with you. You're a member of the Swedish Women's Mediation Network, Director of Department for Middle East, as I mentioned earlier, in North Africa, at the Swedish Ministry for Foreign Affairs. You have done, your bio and all the bios I read, they are so impressive. You have done so much great for this world and for peace, all of you. And we should maybe clarify that the Swedish Women's Mediation Network is part of the larger Women Mediators Network. So the promotion of women's meaningful inclusion in peace processes at all levels is the key for the network. But from your perspective, has the COVID-19 crisis provided any opportunities to advance women's inclusion in peace processes?
Thank you, Alexandra. First of all, I think the COVID-19 really forced the international community and peace mediator actors to really find new ways, innovative ways when it comes to digital solutions to promote the inclusion of women. And this is to ensure that women are able to give their perspective and their influence through these processes. Let me give you an example. There was high-level discussions in Mali on the political participation by women in peace talks. And this was one of the Swedish members of the network was very active here. And then came the COVID-19. And despite that crisis, the relevant actors managed to find ways to select women representatives, and now, through the help of the UN, pursuing peace talks online. But this is, of course, not to say that the job is done. I mean, women have been excluded for so long before the pandemic, and that will be the case also after the pandemic. But it's important to try to find ways, innovative ways, where women it really enhances its participation. I would like to add, for example, we know the EU and the UN is planning for an annual conference on Syria. And of course, this has to be virtual. It has to be digital rather than in person. And now we see, instead of one day only conference with the ministers mainly and high-ranking officials, there will be a several days event, opening up the possibilities for civil society in a quite new way.
Okay, to have access to this discussion, which is great for more,
Absolutely, so this will be more inclusive. So it's important now that women's organizations really maximize these new openings. in participating.
But we also heard General Director Folke Bernadotte Academy, Sven-Eric Söder, also mentioning that we cannot always be sure that everybody has access to the new technology or the Wi-Fi and so on.
No, exactly, and that's also another issue, of course. I mean, you might not even have, in conflict countries, you might not have electricity and certainly no internet access, etc. But it also could bring that women and also youth that previously have been excluded or marginalized might get the chance to have their voices heard. For example, if you come from countries where it's difficult maybe to leave the country or to get a visa to participate in various meetings. So I think it opens up opportunities too.
And especially now when we have like border closures and all these things.
But another aspect, if I may, is I believe the agenda of the women, peace and security, we really see it's more important than ever. And I also think that it's shifted now, the focus has shifted a bit, given the current crisis, more towards what's happening on the ground. And this, again, also opens up for a more inclusive approach.
Yeah, I was thinking, I mean, would you like to say a couple of words about the challenges that need to be addressed right now?
One challenge, which I think has become quite obvious lately, is the undermining and if not attacks from certain quarters on the multilateral system.
Could you be more specific, please, on that one? What do you mean?
Well, we see there are occasionally some countries that have left some of the international institutions that are maybe more needed than ever, like the World Health Organization. And the crisis with the pandemic could also lead to reduced funding to various humanitarian emergencies. So that will be a huge challenge. And we see also, for example, the UN Secretary General Guterres took this excellent initiative of appealing for a global ceasefire during this pandemic. And this was respected in many places, but in other places, the conflict actually accelerated. For example, unfortunately, in Libya and Yemen.
Exactly.
And it really shows the need for women being part of the peace process and inclusiveness.
And therefore, we're very happy to have Zahra from Libya, who will participate in a minute here. My last question to you is, what role can the regional women's mediation networks play in this regard? If you just could say a couple of words about that.
I think the regional women's network are also more important than ever. And now, of course, we are under the umbrella of a global alliance, which was launched in November at the UN, in September last year. And I was very pleased to be part of that. And I think this gives us a wonderful platform to exchange experiences and also network. And this is something that we really need to work intensively on.
Thank you so much for now. And Ambassador Roland Kobia, hello. You've been the EU Special Envoy for Afghanistan since September 2017, working to support the efforts to create sustainable peace in the country. I mean, what has been the most notable impact of COVID-19 on women's role in peace building in Afghanistan, would you say?
Well, I would say, first of all, that COVID is, of course, a rather new phenomenon, so it's not easy to draw final conclusions and long-term perspectives. But what we see is that it has certainly been, some sort of an earthquake, a social earthquake that could possibly be helpful for changing a number of issues. But like all earthquakes and tectonic movements, things might be slow, and it's not sure that it will last after the pandemic. It's a little bit like the EU. The EU has progressed through crisis over its history, steps. So we can hope crisis, besides those very negative aspects, will help having more peace processes. I see basic things. One is a negative impact of it. The fact that Afghan women have already been suffering for decades of conflict, inequality, limitation to basic rights, health, education, of course, and COVID-19 in a way is proving to be different from other crises and is even exacerbating inequalities, because women have less ability to earn their money. It limits their independence, cannot pursue their activities, schools are closed, public gatherings, social movements are restricted. The things you've got in the pandemic and that may impact women more than men. If I look at the potential positive impact, I see two. One is a tiny gender equalizer that the COVID-19 may have. Afghanistan is a very traditional, very conservative society dominated by men who often think that they deserve a different place in society than women. But I think COVID has made Afghans sometimes realize that both men and women are actually, in a way, similarly affected by COVID, while they have been used to war, and war affects them differently. So it's a different paradigm that makes people think, because the place of women in war and in COVID is different. So this new form of war, which is the pandemic, is maybe giving women a more natural place to address the peace process. And the second one is certain.
I was thinking of something you said, Roland, that women and men realize that they are both affected by the COVID crisis. But I was thinking men are more victims. More of the victims are men. I mean, more men die of corona, which means they're more sensitive to the virus.
Yeah, unfortunately, the statistics in Afghanistan are very weak. It is difficult in a war-torn country to actually have real statistics. So we do not know what is happening in Afghanistan, and the official figures are certainly not reflecting entirely the reality. So we don't know if men or women are more affected. It is true that overall men seem to be more affected, but the situation in Afghanistan, because of the fact that you have different zones controlled by the Taliban, zones controlled by the government, disputed zones, is actually making it very complicated. So it's difficult to measure the impact on men and women. But the second point I wanted to mention was really on the positive side, was that I think COVID gave women an advocacy platform. What I saw is that COVID has actually triggered some sort of a bottom-up movement of various civil society groups, notably women who have raised their voices, maybe more than usual. Civil society organizations, and notably women, have been extremely active during the pandemic. And I think their voices are now louder, clearer, and more coordinated, which is extremely important, because this is always a difficult point with civil society organizations when they are not synergetic and coordinated enough, because then they have less impact. So these are just a few trends I could notice on COVID's impact in Afghanistan. But of course, time will tell, and I hope improvements, if they are, will not be only COVID related, but will be more lasting.
Thank you. The EU has established a specific flexible mechanism, the so-called Afghanistan Peace Support Mechanism, to support the efforts for an inclusive Afghan-led and Afghan-owned peace process, including by enabling women's organizations to influence the process. How can this mechanism ensure women's inclusion in the peace talks at all levels? I mean, not only the official levels, during and after the COVID-19 crisis.
Yes, Alessandra, you're correct. I mean, the EU has launched an initiative which is called, as you say, it's a peace support mechanism for Afghanistan, which is implemented by our very good partners here of FB, Folke, Bernadotte, and SIDA. And the aim of this is specifically to support an inclusive peace process in all its dimensions. So notably, women participation. And when we say women participation, it's really at all stages of the peace process, from the preparations, the negotiations themselves, but also the implementation, the follow-up, etc. So we should not segment and work in silos. So we are trying to work with women organizations to help them bring their voices to the process, and we do that through the transfer mechanism that you have mentioned as a springboard, if you wish, for CSOs. The real difficulty is that the voices, there's a tendency to give, a space to a voice just to listen to it. But voices should be heard and taken into account. And this is the most important part and the most difficult one. So we need to go beyond formalities of just having women in the room, and they need to be given real influence. So they must not be invited to make the numbers or to present a facade of inclusivity, but they really need to have a real meaningful role in advising and participating in decision making. And what I see is that if men have failed at war, well, women could help to win the peace. And this is something we're really working very strongly on in Afghanistan. So as you know, this is just one example, this peace mechanism, but the policy of the EU in Afghanistan has always been centered around promoting women, and when as we approach the formal peace process, the EU will continue to do that in promoting this. And just last week, at very high political level, the EU High Representative, Mr. Borrell, and the 27 foreign ministers of the EU have adopted new political orientations on Afghanistan, which I encourage you to read. And there's a very, very strong focus on women. So this position is loud and clear.
Thank you so much, Roland, Kobia. I know you can talk about this for a long time, and unfortunately we don't really have that time, but we have great guests and panelists here talking about this. And you heard what Roland said. Women are not puppets, and they don't just want to be listened to. We also want our voices to make a change or a difference. Zahra Langhi, co-founder and CEO at the Libyan Women's Platform for Peace. Your organization works on peace building, inclusivity and gender equality, and you also participate in the peace talks to solve the Libyan civil war. What has been the impact of the COVID-19 on women's role in peace building efforts in Libya, including the peace talks in Libya and women's role in them?
Well, just recently, only 2 days ago, the warring parties have agreed to resume the peace talks, and I'm referring specifically to the military commission, which met back in the 23rd of February in Geneva, 5+5. So this is a great news, and this comes after ignoring for a long time the call for a global ceasefire. Which was led by the General Secretary of the UN and others. Actually, as you referred, Anna actually referred to earlier, the war in Libya, like in Yemen and other places, accelerated and the conflict exacerbated the international meddling, the proxy war, violating the arms embargo, all ignoring the global call for ceasefire. We've been seeing throughout the last 3-4 months indiscriminate shelling of civilians, indiscriminate shelling of medical centers, hospitals, including those that treat victims of COVID-19. We've been seeing also besieging of entire cities, blocking electricity and water, which are such services are much needed, especially when we're facing this pandemic. And along that, we have seen that the inequalities have been exacerbated. Just a few days ago, there was a heinous massacre of migrants. Crimes are in the rise. Kidnapping of women and using violence against women as a weapon of war. All of this has been happening, and we've been. I just want to focus on: is it women, or what we need to bring is the gender equitable, inclusive agenda to the peace talks, because we have been seeing also women who have been instrumentalized by radical groups to incite hate speech as well. So it's not only about women, it's about the agenda. So it's not only about, as Roland was referring to, the ticking of the box and just bringing any woman to the table of negotiations. And that's why there have been amid this this polarizing environment, completely of propaganda, disinformation, misinformation, using women. We have seen quite a few initiatives led by women peace activists to call for ceasefire. And we have seen these women attacked by all groups.
What you're telling us, Zahra, is really terrible about that very toxic and polarized and polemic situation and all the circumstances you're going through. But what kind of international support do you think is needed to ensure that the conflict resolution continues and that the women are able to influence the peace talks and participate in them?
So actually, we need, at the moment, there might be a resumption very soon for the peace talks, including the political track. We need to see the agenda shifting, the designing of the process shifting, a shift of paradigm, as our colleague just referred to a more people-centered kind of peace building. Not focused on state building and building of institutions, focusing more on a community-based agenda, addressing issues related to social cohesion, to inclusivity. We need not only to bring these voices and hear them, because they are already and empower them. They are already working on the ground and doing great initiatives, and I'm not only referring now to the women peace activists on the national level who have the privilege of speaking to international community, to networks in the Western world, but I'm referring to the local women mediators who have been linking their mediation efforts with service delivery. And more than ever, the question of health, human security should be at the center of peacemaking. So we need to work together, to collaborate, to have clear messages with women mediators, as regional women mediators like yours, FemWise, the International Global Alliance.
Zahra, you just mentioned FemWise, and that reminds me of that we have to go to Lesotho, and we'll get back to you soon. Ambassador Mpeo Mahase-Moiloa, FemWise member, hello from Sweden.
Hello.
Okay.
Yes, once again, hello to you too.
Hello. You're a member of FemWise Africa, the regional women's mediation network of the African Union, and the network aims to strengthen the role of women in conflict prevention and mediation efforts on the African continent. How has the COVID-19 crisis affected FemWise's work?
Thank you very much for your question. The very fact that FemWise is only 3 years old this year says when this pandemic hit, we were in the midst of working towards to build a strong foundation in regards to accreditation and induction of members, establishment of structures from continental to regional, and then to nationalize the initiative. The target was to start with a membership of 500 scattered across the 5 regions of Africa. Out of 395 accredited members, only 190 have been able to be inducted so far. Because normally we would have 2 induction courses per year in Addis. That was not to be the case this past year. We were able to have only 1. So we had to re-strategize and, like everybody else, to migrate digitally. So as we talk, plans are underway to organize an online induction course in few days to come. But the challenge is, as mentioned earlier by the Director General, that it's not everybody who can be reached digitally. So that says it may not be all those members who have to be inducted that will have an opportunity to participate on that online training. It also comes with a cost. However, FemWise is doing all it can to keep the home fires burning. We created some social media platforms, and a lot of interaction is going on there. We are working on nationalizing the FemWise. We are bringing it down to the region. We have agreed recently as the SADC region that let's take opportunity of being stuck at home, if I may use that word, to start mapping conflicts that are national, and then we map regional conflicts, as that will enable or inform our plans going forward, how we see FemWise interacting with, giving a help in trying to bring peace in such conflicted areas. Our ministers.
Yeah, I would like to ask you finally, because we're running out of time here, what is needed, according to you, to maintain the support for a women's role in these peace processes during and also beyond the COVID-19 pandemic?
Okay, thank you very much. Also, I think, like it has been noted already by other panelists, the absence of women in decision-making tables continues to be a concern. And I think we have to come up with ways and means of securing the gains that we have gained before the pandemic in our efforts to close the gender gap. We have like I was saying, I wanted to say earlier that ministers of gender met recently. African Women Leaders Network also had their meeting, and all they were looking into is how we can rebut or try to protect the gains that we had made, and then to make sure that women stay at the center of the peace processes at all levels. And yes, it is a challenge for us to maintain that because of people are not able to move, but we are trying to stay on course to keep our eye on the ball. We have our own, a few have also already been deployed to some conflict areas in Africa, and that says that we need to provide all the support that they need for them to keep going during this time.
Thank you so much for now. Astrid, Thors, you're a member of Nordic Women Mediators in Finland, which is part of the bigger Nordic Women Mediators network. And women are already at the forefront of the fight against COVID-19, acting as first responders and peacemakers in their communities. They've pushed back against militarized responses to COVID-19, arguing instead for approaches that promote sustainable peace, gender equality, and social justice. What role do you see for the regional women's mediation networks in supporting their inclusion as equal partners in decision-making, including in peace building and peace negotiations?
Well, thank you, Alexandra. I think actually, the supporting.
Oh, we lose you then. It's not such a good. Can you? We cannot really hear you. Can we do something about the Astrid?
Yeah. Do you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay.
Let's try it again. Sorry.
Yes. Sometimes the nearest is the most difficult, as we say.
Exactly.
But really, as support inclusion. I take some examples from the Nordic Women Mediation Network. We have set up resource groups after we have had these joint Nordic meetings with participation from Libya, from Syria. And actually, I think that these resource groups, where you have participating Nordic women and women in the conflict area, they can really be good lines of communication in many ways, so that in a way where there is need for mentoring can happen. We do need to pass information from your side, from the side of the conflict, of what we hear in our countries, in the diplomatic missions. I think that's one way of really supporting. And as we see, in mentoring can go very well in digital times. So I think that this is one thing. One other thing where we have noticed in our Finnish network is that, for instance, our women ambassadors who are active in many parts of the world, they can really also promote the national action plans of 1325, because as the Secretary General noticed in his report on the resolution, so very few countries have action plans and resources committed to the action plan. So I think that's a second thing. Then, of course, one sorrow has been a very deep sorrow for many of us, and that was discussed during both the Global Alliance that Anne was mentioning.
Oh, I can't hear you now, Astrid. Something happened to the connection. We lost the connection with Finland. Sometimes the clothes are very hard. Okay, so we have Petra Tötterman Andorff here, who is the Secretary General for Kvinna till Kvinna. Your organization works to support women's rights organizations and women's peace-building efforts in a large number of conflict-affected countries. What would you say are the consequences of the COVID-19 crisis for women's networks, but also for civil society organizations, peace-building efforts, and activism for peace, including on the community level?
Yes, Thank you. I would like to take a starting point in the responses from the 91 women peace builders in 6 different conflict-affected countries that we interviewed last year for our report, Right, Not a Gift. And what we see now with the pandemic is that it is enhancing the problems and the issues that many of these women were already working on and gave warnings about. It's gender-based violence, shrinking space for civil society, and the increased militarization in authoritarian context. And for example, from Lebanon, we hear from our partners reports about 100% increase of calls to the domestic violence hotlines. And in very diverse contexts, such as Rwanda and Armenia, we see how governments are limiting the freedoms of the citizens and increasing the surveillance under the pretense of stopping the infection rate. And we know that women human rights defenders and peace builders are underfunded. They are always working under very harsh circumstances. And now the regimes in some of the countries where we are working have used this pandemic to actually make their work even harder and make it more difficult for them to raise their voices for peace and for gender equality. But I would also like to add that this pandemic, I think, has given us a clear and a very concrete image of how the women, peace and security agenda and the demands of the global women's movement are right on the money. A demilitarized view of security, which takes into account women's and people's everyday life, and that sees healthcare workers as equally or more important and essential to our security than the military, can hopefully gain ground now during this new world order that we find ourselves in.
Thank you so much. That was quite an optimistic.
Well, I think both.
It can be, exactly.
Yeah.
It depends.
Yeah.
It depends on what we do with this. I have some questions. I don't know if Astrid Thors is with us or if we lost her.
But I'm with you. I'm with you.
Are you with us? Oh, hi. Okay, so Astrid, I have a last question for you. How can the Women's Mediation Network work together with other relevant actors, such as the UN and civil society, to support these efforts, would you say?
Well, I think we have a wonderful example of women mediators and civil society and the United Nations when there were 65 women organizations from Iraq, from Libya, Palestine, issuing a joint statement in support of the SD's appeal and calling on conflict parties. I think this is, and signed the petition. You can see the force and the power of women wanting to have a change. So we can also use new tools, to raise the political power that is so important. And I think Roland also mentioned it. We must make the will of women visible, and that we can do also with the networks and civil society. So I think that the previous speaker also spoke about, really maintaining the human rights. We see the effects of not respecting them. We all are very much aware, and it was said earlier in the panel, that minorities and marginalized groups are suffering more. So that's why I think the women mediators need to stretch out the hand to both, organizations working with development and supporting basic human rights standards. And don't forget that we need to also to continue working not only for good internet connections and bridging the digital divide, but also for SDGs. I mean, SDG 3, good health and well-being, is going to be, very much more on the agenda. I don't know if it has been mentioned today, but actually we can see a trend already some years ago that different tracks in mediation are more interlinked. We have many examples that women are active in track 2 or track 2 and 5, but we can see that it is really an interlinkage between the tracks, and that is coming more prevalent when we are using the new tools. So that, I think, is also one of the solutions to go forward.
Yes, we're short of time here, but thank you so much for mentioning the digital tools and the bridge, that we have to close the gap also, because I have received great questions. Thank you, all of you that send questions and comments and everything. And I'm going to share the questions with the panel, and feel free to answer them. And here's the first question. As a result of the difficulties of convening parties for direct peace talks during the COVID-19 pandemic, many mediators have had to turn to digital tools to open and maintain channels of communication with conflict parties. How can we ensure that such digital solutions are used in a way that leads to more inclusive peace processes, including women's inclusion? So, would you like Anne or Roland, or who would like to answer this?
I can start.
Dismorr.
I think the digital new use that is really we see so on a daily basis now, should continue to a certain extent. While of course we're all longing for have physical meetings, because of course you can only create real confidence in person. But I think to reach out to areas and to women that for various reasons cannot participate or sit at the table, we should carry on not leaving those Zoom and the Skype business and all other platforms. So I think a mixture of the two would be the future.
Thank you so much, and I'm grateful that you answer briefly, too, because we have amazing questions. Kvinna from Libya writes this. In Libya, the security situation makes movement and implementation of activities very difficult for women, including those who work for peace. In light of these challenges, how do we motivate, support, and encourage women to act? Who would like to answer that?
I can answer.
Yes, please.
Yes.
Zahra, would you like to answer? Yes, thank you.
Yes, sure. As Anna was saying earlier, the challenge is mediation used to be human-centered. So, and it's cornered around the issue of confidentiality, trust building, and when it comes to it works both ways. So yes, there's an ample opportunity that with digital tools there might be a greater chance for inclusivity. However, again, I need to stress the issue of with digital peacemaking, inequalities might be exacerbated. There are certain parts of the country in Libya that face a lot of cut of electricity and internet. So yes, we are offering, we are opening the window of opportunity, but we know that some people do not have that chance already. So we need to work on digital literacy, digital security. We need to look for more local, smart, innovative institutions. I would call on international community, international agencies to start looking for youth organizations, platforms that support that kind of apps. With COVID-19, we need to have, as much as we want to have multilateral cooperation, we need to see local innovative, smart solutions.
Thank you
so
much,
supporting these
Yes.
groups with apps is important.
Please, I would like to ask you to keep your answers brief if possible, because we have amazing questions here. Here we have Abir in Syria who wonders, do you think peace building and building trust can be done virtually?
May I answer that?
Yes, please.
I think that is exactly, let's say, the difficult thing, because, we as human beings, we start to trust a person when you have met. And it's easier to keep, let's say, existing networks working. But then for the confidential talks, the corridor talks and those things, there we cannot always be confident that even the best digital tool is really keeping our confidentiality. And without having met, we cannot have the total take of a person. So I think we have huge challenges in let's say, in including new people in the talks. And here maybe the networks can be kind of a, let's say, helping force. Women Mediators Network say, look, this is a trusted person that we have seen that you should include. I mean, this has always been the traditional role also of mediation networks, to say to the mediator, to remind him and to say this is a trustworthy person, because that's the most challenging part now in all human interaction during this time.
Thank you so much. Janet in Kenya asks, the inclusion of women has always been a big challenge, even before COVID-19. How do we address the factors that hinder women's inclusion in more sustainable ways, such as existing structures, practices, and the socio-economic status of women? Petra?
Yeah, well, I think that's actually right to the point. I think that there is, let's face it, it hasn't been, the problem with including women in peace talks before COVID wasn't the fact that they couldn't come and join the conversation. It was the lack of the political will, but it was also the fundamental discriminatory structures that we see. And I think that the finance and economics is a very important part of that. And that if I refer back to the study that we did last year, that was one of the things that came up, that the Women Peace Pillar really see is missing in the Women Peace and Security agenda. It's the economic rights of women. So I think that's really to the point. I think we should use this opportunity of COVID-19 and the transparency and the inclusion that digital meetings can give. But at the end of the day, there's more deep-rooted discriminatory structures that need to be addressed to really make sure that women are included, and as has been said before, and not just being listened to, but actually being heard and being at the front of the center of the dialogue that we're having.
What role can the regional women's mediators networks play to support and help sustain women's engagement in all phases of peacemaking during and beyond the COVID-19? Who would like to answer that? Maybe Ambassador Mpeo, Mahase-Moiloa? Thank you.
Yes. Okay, thank you. I think what we have learned out of this pandemic is the importance of capacity building at local level, or what we would otherwise call grassroots level. Because we never thought that we would wake up one day and our right to movement will be grabbed away from us by this pandemic. So we have opportunistic acts that are coming in, like it was mentioned that because of the pandemic, one of the measures the government put in place was the lockdowns, and we saw the rise in gender-based violence. So that says, going forward, we have to find ways and means that in as much as when something like this hit, we don't lose focus on other important issues that should be addressed, because now that maybe it's natural that when something as harsh as this one hit, we take even our resources and everything and focus on that. And then even the conflict itself, look what is happening now in Mozambique. Despite the global call for ceasefire, the conflict is escalating in Mozambique, and that has to be addressed despite the pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I would like to forward another question, and that is from Zahra in Sweden. How can we ensure that we are not creating separate spheres where women, while empowered together, actually never reach the important rooms or processes? Who would like to answer that? Petra? Astrid? Ann?
Could I continue? Yes, I think this is something that all women mediator networks are very much aware of, that danger. But fortunately, there is the realization of some of the basic facts that were said, that we need to design a peace process in such a way that all the different tracks are there. We need to take also all the relevant questions for the community. I think it was Zahra who mentioned, community issues need to also to be at the forefront. And then I think also a role of, as we said, of networks to contact and to be in contact with, let's say, the chief negotiator, the chief mediators. We have several examples that the Nordic women mediators have been successful in putting forward good names and the concerns that have been expressed through the different tracks, so that there is not the separation of the question, because if questions are separated, the concerns, the community's concerns are not addressed. Let me also say just one thing about the networks, and I think it's very important that the flow is always both ways, so that the women in networks really in the middle of the conflict can also give signals to, let's say, countries more peaceful for the need for prevention. We have, during the conflict, I have been in some other networks hearing, okay, now there was a threat against women in a South African country on the continent, and we could forward in 2 days these assaults on women politicians to the relevant UN bodies. I think that has not happened before, but now we are using the different platforms so we can raise an informed international opinion that can help also prevent further conflicts.
Thank you so much. Okay, let me see. Said from Sweden. Do you have any view on how to deal? Okay, do you have any view on how to deal with those conflict parties that do not believe in the inclusion of women and don't want them in peace talks? Well, this is a very relevant question.
I'd like to try and answer that. And I think a concrete example, Sweden we were hosting the UN-led peace talks on Yemen here in Stockholm about 1.5 years ago. And we were working incredibly hard towards the parties, the Yemeni parties, but also the UN, trying to maximize the number of Yemeni women to be part of those negotiations. And of course, there are many barriers to cross here, including institutional. But I think host countries taking on these sort of conferences or peace talks really have a huge responsibility. And we talk about women, their voices needs to be heard, but also it's a question of getting to the table, and that's still many obstacles to get there.
Yeah, can you give me some examples?
Well, I think there are many. There, of course, we know, for example, there was in one of the Middle Eastern countries where a government was being formed, and then there was a very competent woman who was the president wanted her to be part of that cabinet, but the cultural barriers were just too too large. They were too high for her to enter, and her sort of local society was against it. So I think the advocacy part is also very important on a local level. Create role models and reach out, and not only on a sort of national high level, but on all different levels.
But you have been like mediating and working with women's mediations for so many years, and this is a very interesting question. How exactly are there any? How do we deal with those that do not absolutely not believe in the inclusion of women?
First of all, you need resilience and perseverance, but you also need the political backup. For example, in Sweden we now have a foreign minister who is very, very keen on these issues.
Ann-Linde, who is going to be in the next session, and I invite you all to
And you need that sort of political support to really make a difference. And then in every possible event, whether when you're formulating resolutions in the UN or sending a delegation to a country, make sure also that you on the sort of on your own side are properly represented by women.
Thank you so much. Roland, do you have something to add to this question?
Yes, the nearest is the furthest, because you can't see me, I think, next to you. I've been trying to jump in. Thank you very much, Alessandra. Just a word to confirm what the previous panelist said. I think the way to promote this is actually two. One is advocacy and dialogue. I mean, if I can give a very concrete example, I have talks with the Taliban, which is not maybe the first constituency, the most obvious, to accept women part of the peace process. And it's very important, you know, to try to explain, to persuade, to make people understand that maybe, you know, sometimes you need to change opinion. So we very often start from very far apart, and we very often disagree, but at least there is a dialogue, and this is a very good first step. But the second thing I wanted to mention is, in order to make that more efficient and in a way bring people who do not want to accept that, is the issue of political conditionalities. And this is what the EU is doing in Afghanistan. We have said very clearly, even at political level, I was mentioning the ministers who took a decision last week, and we have put very clear conditions for our support. And we said that if women are not participating, if a number of rights, freedoms are not upheld, well, it's very difficult for the EU to help these constituencies that are resisting this. So I think at a certain stage you need to learn playing the game of power and showing people that if they do not want to improve on a number of things, well, then it will be complicated to get our support.
Thank you so much. This is how a real negotiator speaks, as all of you. Thank you. I have more questions for you, and really thank you all for these questions. Experts fear that COVID-19 will mean a setback for women's rights. Progress that has been made for years or decades have regressed in the matter of a couple of months. How do we safeguard women's rights during this pandemic? Please, Anne.
I'd like to touch upon the pandemic, because it's not only a health crisis and economic crisis, but it's also a human rights crisis. Because we see now in certain countries, which Petra, I think you were highlighting, some regimes introducing further restrictions that might well stay in place after the pandemic, and which will reduce the democratic space. So I think here again, coming back to the multilateral system, that is the best way forward, to use that platform and its institutions to really protect and promote women's rights. And that's why we need to really stand up when the multilateral system is, from certain quarters, threatened.
The threats coming. This is very interesting, and also I read your report, Kvinna, which also mentions this, but I have a question that I think you can answer. With the COVID-19 pandemic, some states are moving away from democracy towards, exactly as you said, increased autocracy and militarization. Are you concerned with the rise of more conservative populism, and what can we do about it? Petra, Tötterman, Andorff.
Yes, I think we all should be concerned, and I think that just looking in the media, people are concerned about it. But definitely, and as I said in the beginning, this was already on the radar of women human rights defenders before COVID. You know, they talked about shrinking civil space, and they also talked about the increased militarization in these autocratic states. And I think an important part is to make sure that the women's rights organization actually pull through in these hard times. So I think right now what we need is to see, you know, flexible funding for women's rights organization so that they can continue to be relevant actors in their communities responding to the crisis as we see. But then I also think, and it's been mentioned before, what we need to do is always to link it to the international levels. And it's extremely important in conversations like this to continue to invite women human rights defenders to continue to put these issues and their daily realities on the international agenda as well.
Thank you so much, Petra. I would like to hear Zahra from Libya, and I would also like to hear Mpeo Mahase-Moiloa from Lesotho elaborate a bit on this. I mean, on what we asked a question earlier about negotiating with those that don't even want to see women's inclusion, those that maybe even exclude women, you know, systematically exclude them.
Yes, I actually wanted to stress the importance of the need at this time, after 20 years of the WPS agenda, and we've seen the lack of political will, not only nationally, but internationally. And we've been seeing that there have been great efforts by women mediator networks, by women human rights activists to lobby for women's inclusion, but we are not seeing enough. So I think enough is enough, and it is the time to turn the tables. And I think that COVID-19 actually poses here an ample window of opportunity to reshape peace processes, to bring people at the center, to bring economic and social rights at the center. Peace is not anymore about power sharing among corrupt elite. It should be about addressing root causes of inequalities. So everyday lives of people matter. And if we reshape these peace processes in that way, definitely women will be on the table. If women should not be invited to the table, should create new tables. And this is maybe something coming up with the digital age. And I don't want us to focus, to be distracted with the tools, on digital security, digital literacy, all these issues, and forget about the main ethical issues that we need to be more empathetic, more compassionate, more collaborative. These are the answers that we need to see globally and locally.
Thank you so much, Zahra. Before I invite you to answer this, I would like to add another question to you, and that is, let me see now, because I have so many questions. I think you can answer this, Mpeo Mahase-Moiloa. It's from Grace in Kenya. How to amplify the voices of women peace mediators who work at the grassroots level and who never get access to high-profile mediators. During this crisis, a lot of violence is happening, and they are engaged in community-based peace mediation to address this, but the work continues to go unnoticed. What would you answer on that?
I think it is our responsibility as women mediators networks to ensure that the work that is done by women at grassroots level, it is noticed, and their voices are amplified. So that we can do through advocacy. We can do a lot of lobbying. We need to intensify our efforts in those areas. Yes, a lot goes with the political will, but like it has been mentioned, we can't only rely on political will. So as part of civil society, we need to keep pushing to make sure that we have inclusive democracy, inclusive economics, and that women are at the center of a decision-making. Peace building process is included, because conflict affects us differently. It affects women and children differently than it affects men. Therefore, we have to be heard. We have to be part of drafting of those peace agreements and their implementation.
Thank you so much. Okay, so now I have to choose one of the last question for this open session, and that is, I think, Anna from the UK. Young people also continue to be excluded from decision-making and peace-building, including young women. How to ensure a greater role for young women in conflict resolution? Is this something that the age... do you notice this, that young people are excluded, and maybe especially young women?
Can I come in?
Sorry, who is it? Yes, please.
Astrid.
Yes.
Astrid. I think we have many efforts to combine the two UN resolutions, both also youth participation in peace negotiations. And my friends in the network have mentioned that, young female leaders are also quite skillful in using these new technologies. So I think they will be able to play a very, very crucial role. And the whole multilateral system is so conscious that we need to take their voices on board, because they have solutions for the climate change, the things we have not yet mentioned, but we should not forget that the natural disasters, the loss of biodiversity and climate change are things that are going to influence them very, very much. And they want to have a decision-making based on facts, as mentioned. But while I have the floor, let me say that we have quite much stressed that we believe that, the new concerns have come to the forefront because of COVID. But there might be a little bit danger that, we should not allow women to be restricted to let's say, the first front workers, and the political role there's a risk that the political role of women is pushed back. And that must not happen. I think that this is a risk we must be aware of as women mediators networks, that the political process, all the roles of the women must be really taken on board. And may I continue from Zahra's intervention, because I think it's really important, and when we are talking to friends there in Sweden, hosting us, that we need to see that different community groups have the tools to see how much progress is made in their communities, or how much backwards when we look at the SDGs, for instance, because that's a big friend of them. We need to ensure that. And we also need to ensure in peace processes that there is and will be, as a result of peace processes, the transparency of the use of a country's resources. Because otherwise, we are only talking about power sharing agreements, as Zahra was saying.
Thank you so much, Astrid. Okay, so I would like to close the floor here, but I would like to offer you all the possibility of, taking like 1 minute or a couple of sentences to give us all your key recommendations about how to put women's leadership at the center or in the front of the conflict resolution during and beyond the COVID-19 pandemic, the crisis. So I offer you 1 minute and you offer me a key recommendation. Who wants to start? Maybe Roland here to my right. Roland Kobia, EU Special Envoy for Afghanistan, please feel free to start.
Thank you, Alessandra. Thank you very much. Just a reflection. I thought it was an extremely interesting conversation. What I take out of it is, number one, we all recognize that we are social animals, and that Homo sapiens, really needs physical interaction. So digital contacts are, of course, coming in as something we need to do now, but at a certain stage, they will be back to normal. What we really need to see, and we have listened today to all the speakers saying that there were actually pros and cons in the digital mediation. Some things are better, other things can create more hurdles. What is important is to try to build on the good things. And I like the Zahra's enough is enough, and I think indeed we need to use this crisis to really bring about a meaningful change that will last after the COVID crisis. What we should avoid, and this would be my recommendation, is to actually draw the lessons of what was better and ensure we do not return to the old normal once this pandemic will be over. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Roland Kobia, and good luck with everything. And we really hope to see you live one day here in Sweden or somewhere. Zahra Langhi, co-founder and CEO of the Libyan Women's Platform for Peace.
I would basically say that everyday lives of people, and especially of those who are most marginalized, like women, matter. This should be our motto when we're thinking to design peace processes and we're thinking of mediation efforts. Moving and shifting peace processes and mediation from state-centered, top-down, template-driven to bottom-up, people-centered, that's what, supporting local innovative solutions. That's how we should approach peace processes and mediation. People at the center, protection of civilians, of disenfranchised groups, and not about power sharing. So everyday lives, and especially economic and social rights, matter.
Yeah. Lives matter, and that's also a very hot topic these days. And thank you for addressing social injustices and widen the perspective. Ambassador Dismorr, member of the Swedish Women's Mediation. I'm mentioning your titles again so people will remember you. Please, you have 1 minute.
I would like to re-emphasize the importance of cooperation and multilateralism. I think the best way to support and promote women in decision-making, including peace processes, is through the multilateral system. And I'd like to quote the South African foreign minister who was participating the other day in a meeting on gender. She said, now the 2020 is an important anniversary year when it comes to gender issues. Of course, we have limitations now with the pandemic, so let's make 2021. We carry on the celebration and anniversary then.
Of course, that's a great idea.
I think so too.
Oh, thank you so much, Anne. Okay, and let's see. Petra Tötterman Andorff, Secretary General Kvinna till Kvinna, and you recently released a report on this topic, and people can read it in English.
Yes, of course. Very welcome to find it on our website. I think that a lot of brilliant things has been said. Just wanting to emphasize again, to treat inclusive peace processes as investment, both political and financial. And it has also been mentioned that COVID-19 is not just a health crisis, it's very much a democratic and an economic crisis, and we need to make sure that women are part of the economic recovery processes. And then it's been said several times with my colleagues here in the panel, but to really anchor peace-building efforts in the community communities where they are implemented. And I really agree with Anne, the importance of multilateralism, but the international organizations need to be further connected to the local communities to really bring sustainable, peaceful societies forward.
And the grassroots.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's the linkages.
Yeah, thank you so much, Petra. Her Excellency Ambassador Mpeo Mahase-Moiloa, FemWise member.
Thank you very much. I think one lesson that one has learned out of this COVID-19 pandemic is that there's no one-size-fits-all approach, because what may be a health hazard to one country, in another country, it's more of an economic or humanitarian issue. But I cannot overemphasize also, just like the last speaker has said, the importance of capacitating local communities on peace-building efforts, so that when the world cannot move, but at least we know that people can be able to address the conflicts that confront them at local level.
Thank you for these words. And finally, Astrid Thors, member of the Nordic Women Mediators in Finland.
Well, the wise previous members have said so many good things, but maybe I can add that I think we, for future mediation efforts, need to have a good combination of further good consultation, a wider consultation. The bottom-up approach is made possible by the experience we have gained. But we need to have a good balance between then also possibilities for confidential meetings and person-to-person meetings. This good combination we must really develop. And I think that there are many lessons also for the UN's mediation teams, because they could maybe update their toolkit for digital mediation. There are many lessons learned from these examples. I also really want to stress once more, that in the, let's say, cooperation to help communities, the digital divide must be at the center. And I think there are many interesting ways how local communities also can help themselves really to give equal possibilities to all. And what the Swedish members there in the studio said about connecting the different pillars of UN work, human rights, security, we must ensure that, and we must ensure that our voices are heard also when the UN peace-building structure is now discussed and maybe revised, and the work is going on with good support of your Swedish Annika Söder. So I think we must also in that work take into account what we have said in this conversation and the conversations to come.
Thank you so much for joining this conversation, all of you, really. It was an amazing session, and thanks to all of you that have been with us. But it's time for the concluding remarks, and Sven-Eric Söder, the Director General from the Folke Bernadotte Academy, he's back.
I'm back. So thank you, Alexandra, and thank you very much, all panelists. I have listened carefully to the discussions, and I think we can all agree that we have got a lot of interesting insights, but also, I would say, interesting and important recommendations. It is, of course, impossible to summarize a session like this, but I would like to share a few takeaways from this session. 5 takeaways. And first, I fully agree that the agenda is key, and the design of the agenda is important, because if we don't have a properly designed agenda, it's very, very difficult to get participation from women. And secondly, I think it is important not to stick too much to big politics. Many of our guests on the panel, they have stressed the importance of non-governmental organizations and community-based activities. I can fully agree on that as well. It's so important when it's difficult to reach successes on the highest level. It is possible to do a lot on the local level. My third takeaway is in line with that. I don't think that changes are coming from the big words. I think practical steps like the promotion of national action plans, for example, are also key for success if we would really like to reach changes. And fourth, I also fully agree that we need to take advantage of what we have learned during the time when we have worked on distance. Digital solutions can't replace physical meetings, but for sure we have learned a lot, and it's so important to keep that in mind and use the knowledge that we have got the last months. And finally, I think that the Women, Peace and Security agenda is important, of course, but it's also important not to forget what one of the panelists said, that it is important to work on the deep-rooted discriminatory structures in societies that we do have. Because if we can't challenge the structures we have in our societies, we will not be successful in the implementation of the Women, Peace and Security agenda. So that's my takeaways from this session. So by these words, once again, thank you very much. And thank you all the viewers that have listened and watched us. And I wish you all good health and keep up the good work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sven-Eric Söder, och tack så mycket, as we say in Sweden. And shukran, merci beaucoup, kiitos to all of you that have been us today. But you know what? Stay there. Stay wherever you are, because in less than 1 hour at 1500, 3 o'clock Central European time, you will have the chance to take part and join us for a high-level discussion with all the 5 Nordic ministers, foreign ministers, no, 4, only 4, because something happened to the 5th. Anyhow, so 4 foreign ministers from the Nordic countries on cooperation and leadership on women, peace and security in the time of COVID-19. Don't miss that. And also, you can use the hashtag Nordic Women's. What was the hashtag? Nordic Women's Meeting 2020 to share your thoughts or maybe even send questions and so on. My name is Alexandra Pascalidou, and I am so grateful to be part of this, and I really hope we all step up and engage even more for peace, women's inclusion and security. Thank you so much.